Hello, I'm Jonathan Swann. I'm a professor at the University of Southampton and the director of the UK Gut Immune Brain Axis Network. And in this talk, I'm going to cover how the turkey and the potatoes as part of the Christmas dinner can potentially impact on the gut immune brain axis. And if we start with the turkey then, turkey's rich in protein, and as that protein passes through our guts, it's digested into peptides, which are strings of amino acids, and then broken down further into individual amino acids. And this is done by our own digestive enzymes, but also those of the bacteria that live in our guts. And those bacteria can also modify these amino acids further to produce other compounds which can have what we call bioactivity, the ability to have an impact on our bodies. And these can have a local impact on the gut, but they can also be absorbed, reach the blood circulation where they can reach the brain and have an effect. Well, what I want to focus on today in this short talk is their role in neurotransmitters. Now, neurotransmitters are really important for brain function, and they're important because they're chemical messengers. Now, they're really important for nerve cells or neurons to talk to one another. So neurons have this tiny gap between them. They don't actually touch, and they rely on neurotransmitters to pass the signal from one to another, or from a neuron to another target cell, such as a muscle cell. And so they're really important for communication. And so from that reason, they're really important with helping the brain process information. And in doing so, they can have a role on our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. They're also really important for other bodily functions such as breathing, heart rate, digestion, and they also, as I said, they can signal to muscle cells. They can be used to send a signal from a neuron to a muscle cell telling it to contract, and so in this case they're really important for movement as well. So we know as well that imbalances in the neurotransmitters have been implicated in different conditions, and that includes things like depression, anxiety, epilepsy, Parkinson's disease. And why we're talking about these with the gut microbiota is we know that many of the bacteria in the gut can synthesize these different neurotransmitters. Now, these bacterially derived neurotransmitters are unlikely to reach the brain and have a direct impact, but the bacteria use the same building blocks, the amino acids, to make them. And so what this means is actually they kind of exist in a competition with the human host, with you. And so if you've got a microbiome that produces a lot of, for example, serotonin, then the bacteria are going to use up lots of the amino acid tryptophan that they need to make serotonin. And that means there's less available for you to absorb and make your own serotonin. And this is important because everyone listening to this has a different gut microbiome that has a different functional capacity. And so differences across people in the production of these neurotransmitters changes the availability of the amino acids, which changes your availability or your capacity to make your own neurotransmitters. If we shift to the potatoes now, we're going to focus on the carbohydrate portion of the potatoes. A typical potato contains around 30 to 35 grams of carbohydrate. The majority of that is starch. Some is sugar, and around 3 to 4 grams is dietary fibre. And I'm going to cheat a little in this talk. I'm just going to focus on the dietary fibre, so ignoring the bulk of the starch. And dietary fibre is really important. Non-digestible dietary fibre is really important for health. It's recommended that people should consume 30 grams a day of dietary fibre, and people at a push get about 20 grams. So really, we need to increase the amount of fibre we're eating. And the reason why that's important is because we don't really possess the enzymes to break down dietary fibre, and so that can pass through the gut, increasing what we call transit time, allowing material to move through the gut better, which has been shown to reduce the risk of things like colorectal cancer. But it's also really important because the bacteria in your gut, they do possess the enzymes to break down the dietary fibre and ferment it into what we call the short chain fatty acids. So the main ones being acetate, butyrate and propionate. And these are important because they have the potential to change our eating behaviours. They can change our appetite, how full we feel. And they can do this a couple of different ways. So firstly, you have these, these are the cells that line your gut. And you have cells along your gut called the enteroendocrine cells, and they're sensing what's in the gut. And if they sense and detect short-chain fatty acids, this triggers the release of appetite hormones, GLP-1 and PYY. And these signal to the brain what we call satiety, the feeling of fullness. So they send that signal, the brain feels it's full, and it reduces your appetite. And it's thought that this could be, like increasing short-chain fatty acids could be a potential target for combating things like obesity. And actually it makes complete sense because the microbes in our gut were actually there first in evolution, and actually we've co-evolved in their presence. And so it makes complete sense that these microorganisms, given that they're reliant on us for the material that they consume, that they have this ability to regulate our feeding behaviours. We've also shown that these short-chain fatty acids can be absorbed from the gut, enter the blood circulation and reach the brain, where they can enter the brain and also have a very direct impact on our appetite behaviour as well. The other focus I want to talk about with the short-chain fatty acids, and in that case potatoes, is so if these are the cells that line our gut, you can see that they're tightly packed together. And in between these cells, you have things called the tight junction proteins. And what that means is it makes a really nice tight barrier along the gut. And that means material in the gut, chemicals, compounds in the gut, can't freely move between cells. Instead, they have to go through cells. So that means you have a very tight control over what moves from the gut into the blood and potentially reach the brain. And short-chain fatty acids have shown to be beneficial to strengthening these tight junction proteins. And it's thought that if you lose short-chain fatty acids, you sort of have impaired permeability of your gut, which can lead to something called a leaky gut. And exactly the same thing can happen in the brain. So in the brain, you have these capillaries throughout the brain, and they again are these endothelial cells, the cells of these capillaries, and they're tightly packed together with these tight junctions between them. And again, they have a tight control, it's what we call the blood-brain barrier, and they control what moves from the blood into the brain and vice versa, the brain into the blood. And so one of the things that can happen is you have gram-negative bacteria, type of bacteria present in your gut, and on their cell wall, the outer wall of the bacteria, you have these little chemical sort of strands, what we call the lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. And so if you've got a leakier gut, these bacteria, or broken down fragments of these bacteria, can move from the gut into your circulation, where they can reach the brain. And these are inflammatory, they can trigger inflammation. And what these authors showed is, so what you can do to look at how permeable this blood-brain barrier is, and bear in mind more permeability is bad, is you can grow these endothelial cells in a lab and put a dye there and see if the dye can pass through, what we call this fitsidextran. And what they showed, so here this is in a control, so this is just the endothelial cells, and then if they dose them with this LPS, this inflammatory cell wall component, then that permeability increases. It makes the blood-brain barrier more permeable, which is a bad thing. But what they also showed is if you took these short-chain fatty acids from these dietary fibers from the bacteria and you bathed the cells in the short-chain fatty acids first and then expose them to this signal, you don't get that increase in permeability. So what that shows, as well as acting in the gut, these short-chain fatty acids can also have a beneficial effect on your blood-brain barrier in the brain. So I'll end there. And really, the take-home message really is that a balanced diet is really important. Have lots of fibre. Amino acids are also really important. Look after our gut bacteria, and have a good Christmas. Thank you.